So it's spring break. Well, can we at least imagine that it's spring break? Now imagine that you're one of the many college students who are headed to Panama City Beach for spring break. Upon arriving to the beach, you see the perfect girl or the perfect boy. Their bodies shaped to perfection, hers looking like it came out of Victoria's Secret headquarters. Now, what really gets your temperature rising is the ink across his chest and the ink going down her side. These are what we call tattoos. As you can tell, many of us in here have tattoos. I've seen them in class. And according to CBS News, 23% of college students have at least 1 to 3 tattoos. Now, how many of you can tell me the origin of tattoos? The type of ink used? The cultural representation of a tattoo? Anybody? Better yet, how many of you can know that one of our former presidents has a tattoo? According to abcnews.com, an article about U.S. politicians who have tattoos, former President Theodore Roosevelt, which this is Photoshop, but he had a tattoo of his family's crest iron across his chest. And this is Jesse Jackson Jr. He's a U.S. politician. He also has 2 half sleeves. And he says that his tattoo is an art. And today my group will tell you more about tattoos. Danielle will tell you the history and cultural representation of tattoos. Sam will tell you about the technology used for tattooing throughout time. Christine will tell you about the health implications of tattoos. And lastly, Mark will tell you about the treatment of tattoos. We have done a lot of research, and actually one member in our group has a tattoo, so we are very credible in speaking to you today about these topics. Now we'll turn it over to Danielle so she can tell us about the cultural history of tattoo.
Right? Chris Rayner once said, "A blank skin is merely a canvas for a story." Now, today I'm going to talk to you about the historical and cultural representations of tattoos across history. From the class survey, 5 of you have a tattoo while 8 of you don't, but 12 of you have considered getting one. And that's 12 out of 13 who actually took my survey last Friday. And I personally do not have a tattoo, but I've done extensive research on this topic, and I hope to inform you guys about the historic and cultural representations, starting with a brief history of the earliest examples of tattoos, and going deeper to address 3 specific cultures: American, Asian, and the Maori culture. Now, there's so much history we can cover on tattooing, but since this is a timed speech, I have to be specific. Now, the earliest examples of tattooing was found on a mummy named Otzi the Iceman. He was excavated 5,000 years ago, and he had about 57 tattoos all across his body. And analysts say that these tattoos were all thought to be medicinal because they found them all on acupuncture points. So, but this is just a guess. No one's really sure if this was the actual purpose for these tattoos, but they do know that they were tattoos on his body. Now, for a long time, the Egyptian mummies with tattoos were the first recorded evidence of the tattoos, but ever since Otzi was discovered, that perception changed. And as you can see, those are the tattoos Otzi had, and then this is just the overview of what I'm talking about right now. And in 1921 BC, henna tattoos, which are a temporary type of tattoo, were spreading across Asia. And in 1232 BC, the ancient Greeks and Romans started to associate tattooing with criminals and branding the criminals. And thus, it's not a good image for those citizens. Now that we've covered a brief history of the origins, I want to discuss how tattoos were represented in the past. Starting with American culture, at the turn of the 19th century, tattooing was not as common as it is today. As Catherine McNair said, tattoos were as much about self-expression as they were about having a unique way to identify a sailor's body. if lost at sea or caught by the British Navy. Now, tattoos were also associated with criminality in American culture, and they also were viewed as freak shows. And as you can see here, this is the amazing tattooed lady, and that does not happen a lot today. People actually pay to go and see just someone who is fully tattooed, and that's just a big difference as what we see now. And in China, tattoos were associated with the lower classes and the underworld. And in Japan, they had a significant spiritual connection to the tattoos, and in both, they were also associated with wrongdoers, which is a common theme in the past. And with the Maori tribe, they had a tattooing of, it's called the Art of Moko, and essentially they tattoo all their bodies in a very gruesome way, like with the chisel, and it hurts a lot, but it gives the tribe a lot of respect, and each family has a distinct mark that they pass down in generations. And Margaret Orbo has said that it is a sign of aristocratic birth. And this tribe is found in New Zealand. So now that you know how these cultures viewed tattooing in the past, I'm going to address how in these same cultures they're represented now. According to Pew Research Center, about 36% of college-aged Americans have a tattoo. And this goes back to the survey I took last week, where 5 out of 13 of you have a tattoo, and it's about 38%. Now, it is also recognized as a profession and an art form by the U.S. government now, which is a big change to just associating tattoos with criminals and sailors and the tattooed lady. And currently, in Japan and China, it is not widely accepted, yet the younger generation is more prone to get a tattoo and more willing to get a tattoo, yet they have to cover it since the older generation is not very accepting of it. And in the Maori tribe today, the culture has disappeared, and the only time that these tattoos are shown across the face are during concerts, during Maori concerts, and they use grease paint instead of permanent ink. And in summary, today I have covered the historic and cultural representations of tattoos in the American, Asian, and the Maori tribe, and comparing how they were viewed then and now. And Sam is going to talk about the tattooing techniques and their history behind that. But before I hand it over to Sam, I want to remind you that all of you have a story, and tattoos can help illustrate them. But the question is, are you willing to decorate your canvas?
All right. Thank you, Danielle. How many of you knew that Thomas Edison helped give rise to tattoos? Well, although most people associate him with the light bulb, he indirectly advanced tattoo technology. I am here today to inform you on the tattoo of technology throughout time. Based on my class survey, 11 out of 13 of you believe that you are familiar with the instruments involved with tattoos. For the past week, I've done extensive research on this topic and feel very credible to talk about it. I am going to break down the history of tattoo technology in 3 separate phases, from the most earliest to the most modern. This involves the ancient Egyptian bronze points, the O'Reilly modified electric pen, and the 2-coil tattoo machine. Before I go any further in the presentation, I just want to say I'm not here to advocate tattoos. In a matter of fact, you could get a henna tattoo as a non-permanent tattoo, so just to respect diversity. Let's begin by going back in time around 2100 BC. The earliest evidence of tattoos was discovered in ancient Egypt. For example, in this picture, this shows the bronze objects that were used for tattooing. These bronze prick points were excavated in Egypt in 1880. The bronze objects were used as prick points to pierce the skin deep enough to inject the soot ink. Soot is a black powder that is formed when something such as wood or coal is burned. According to iloveindia.com, the tattoo artist pierced the skin with sharp points, giving the skin design and formations, and simultaneously rubbed this soot ink on the fresh tattoo wound. This method was obviously very painful and very prone to infection. Now let's advance forward to the late 19th century. And this is just, here, let me go back real quick. This is just a photo of what I was explaining earlier. They basically used the bronze points and they made an incision in their skin and they put the soot ink inside, and most of their designs were very basic. They were very geometrical, and most of the women were discovered with the tattoos. So now let's advance to the late 19th century. Thomas Edison's electric pen, which was used for writing, was eventually modified for tattooing. Samuel O'Reilly modified the pen to include a tube and a needle to provide an ink reservoir. This introduced ink to the skin. And originally, so this picture just shows that Edison's electric pen, which was used for writing, and then Samuel O'Reilly, a few years later, he basically modified this machine and made it into a tattoo technology. O'Reilly is credited for having invented the first electric tattoo machine. According to TattooToday.com, O'Reilly's machine was based on the rotary technology of Edison's device. And the rotary technology is simply this wheel right here, and it's an electric wheel, and that's what he used in the tattoo technology. The rotary technology was used as an electronic motor to drive the needle up and down. Unlike the ancient Egyptians, this was far less invasive and accounted for less pain. This was a transition from bronze points to modern tattoo needles. Now let's move on to the most modern technology. And this was just a slide of Samuel O'Reilly. Like I said, he was the first person to invent the modern tattoo machine, and he actually opened up his own tattoo parlor. And this was one of his best friends, and he used the rotary technology to make his tattoo creations on his people. The two-coil tattoo machine is the most advanced mechanism in tattooing. By far, it is the most commonly used device. According to prlog.com, these machines use electromagnetic coils, which can either perform lining or shading. The coils are known to produce more power than the rotary machine. Although it may be faster, the coils create the proper resistance to cause fewer traumas to the skin. Most modern tattoo machines can control needle depth, speed, and force. The advancement in precision and speed are key components of modern tattooing. And for example, this is the two-coil tattoo machine, and since there was more of a focus for a precise instrument, they can now do very specific creations. For example, on that tattoo right there, there's multiple colors, there's a lot of shading and a lot of lining, and they couldn't do something like this with the rotary technology from Samuel O'Reilly. In conclusion, I have shown you tattooing through time in 3 simple stages: the ancient Egyptian bronze points, the modified electric pen, and the two-coil tattoo machine. From bronze to needle, from rotary to coil, the tattoo technology has been modernized. So, moving on, what are the medical implications of tattooing? Christine will now take that over and explain that.
I'm going to ask you guys 2 questions. The reason I'm doing this is because, based on previous experience and things I've learned from my psychology classes, when you are expecting something or curious about something, you're more likely to pay attention. How many of you believe that there has been any cases reported of HIV by the CDC by a licensed tattoo artist? Was that clear enough? Does anybody have any guesses, yes or no? Has there been any reported cases of HIV by the CDC due to tattooing by a licensed tattoo artist? Okay, well, since nobody has any answers, we'll move on to the next one. Does anybody believe that the ink used in our body today is FDA regulated? Does anybody know what the FDA regulation is for? Well, now I will begin. What if the tattoo artist is stabbing you repeatedly with those bronze points punctured a major vein or artery? What if the person tattooing you tattooed you with the same needle, the same ink, and the same bucket of wash? This was a reality faced by many tattooed in the past based on my extensive research of past tattooing mechanisms. Today I will share with you various medical implications of ancient Egypt, the United States in 1900s, and modern day America. To begin with, we will dig deep into the past to ancient Egypt, where they used soot and bronze points to tattoo. What they would do is they would puncture you repeatedly with those and rub the soot on you. Up here is an example of one of the mummies found tattooed. If soot is able to enter your bloodstream, it can alter the body's defenses, it can damage lung tissues, and it can aggravate respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. It can also lead to cancer and premature death. Tattoos are considered open wounds. This is because when you're repeatedly stabbed, your body cannot respond fast enough and clog up those little holes. So it can be very susceptible to infections. An infectious disease present at that time in ancient Egypt was schistosomiasis. It was transmitted when the individual with an open wound came into contact with fresh water that contained the parasitic worms. These parasitic worms could cause liver damage, damage to your intestines, lungs, and bladder. Eggs found in the brain or spinal cord can cause seizures, paralysis, or spinal cord inflammation. Next along my journey, we will visit the tattoo shops in America during the 1900s. They were also known as bucket shops. They were known as bucket shops because whenever they would clean the wound, they would put it in the same bucket as they used on all the other customers in that same day. So there was a lot of blood mixing. Is anybody aware of how the mechanism of tattooing works and why they need to clean it? I will explain. When they're doing the tattoos, they're injecting ink into your skin, but not all of the ink gets into your skin. So both ink and blood is coming out. So they need to, as they're doing the tattoo, continuously wipe it down. So you could basically see how there was a lack of sterility and hygiene. Hepatitis B was one of the most common transmitted along those days by this mechanism. Hepatitis B is caused by inflammation of the liver. The liver is very important because it's important for gluconeogenesis, cleansing the body, especially when college students may or may not be drinking, and it produces the body's reservoir of bile. According to the CDC, hepatitis B has actually declined by 82% since 1990. This was due to vaccinations. However, if you have not been vaccinated, vaccinations cannot be used to cure hepatitis. So if you contract it and you've never gotten a vaccination, you will get it and it must be treated. HIV and AIDS is another blood-borne disease that affects all your T cells. So what happens is your body is not able to fight off diseases. According to the CDC, no single reported case of HIV or hepatitis C came from a licensed tattoo artist. However, many during this era were not licensed. It was also a cause for concern for a disease called sepsis. It is when the body has a severe response to bacteria or other germs. It can cause organ damage, failure, or clotting.
The reason why clotting is a problem is because it does not allow enough oxygen and nutrients to get to the body, and you can have a stroke or a heart attack. Even today, the main modern mechanism in the United States carries medical implications. There's a problem with the ink. The ink has a lot of heavy metals in it and can cause skin allergies. I know this from experience because I had an allergy to one of the most common allergy-forming ink. That is the red ink. The red ink contains iron in it, and sometimes your body doesn't recognize it when it is on the outer surface because it is only used to the antibodies of the skin and not foreign metals like iron. So one of the most common things are granulomas caused on the skin. It can only be treated with either topical hydrocortisone, sometimes it needs to have shots of hydrocortisone, or just permanent laser removal. Another problem today faced is sterility in prisons and stick and poke artists. In prisons, it's not regulated. Tattoos are done by inmates doing it on each other. Another thing is stick and poke artists. Those are homemade tattoos done by ordinary unlicensed people. What they do is they take a needle, they burn the tip of it, put ink on it, and just stab you repeatedly. And that is also not regulated. Hepatitis, herpes, HIV, staph, tetanus, and tuberculosis are all at risk for transmission. Go to the next slide, by the way. Those are the granulomas right here. And these are what modern day tattoo parlors tend to look like. In conclusion, the art of tattooing since its birth has carried a multitude of medical implications. From ancient Egypt to modern day America, not only have technological advancements taken place for better looking tattoos and a faster experience, but also to lessen the medical implications of getting a tattoo. If you plan on getting a tattoo, make sure the place you get it from has good ethics and is very sterile, meaning they use a separate needle for you than they use for anybody else, and they pour the ink out in the little containers so they're not mixing the ink and the blood and putting it into everybody. Or you can be the next case of HIV or hepatitis. Now that I'm done, I will hand it over to Mark that will tell you if you do catch any of these diseases, or anybody you know, he will tell you about how to treat these. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. As my esteemed colleagues have told you about the history of tattoos, I will now be focusing on the more modern treatments to get you the consumer information that you need to be safe in your tattooing practices. So, tattoos have many health implications, but if you know how to handle these, tattoos have many health implications, but if you know how to handle them, you don't need to be worried about them. The Journal of Experimental Dermatology published in 2010 that over 25% of 18 to 25-year-olds have tattoos. That means you or somebody you know probably has a tattoo. Look to the person in front of you, behind you, to the left, and to right. Odds are one of them has a tattoo, and they may experience health-related issues. This means that everyone should be able to recognize and respond to the side effects of tattoos. I've spent the last 2 weeks researching this topic, so now I will walk you through the proper diagnosis and treatment of the 3 most common side effects of tattoos: allergic reactions, ink poisoning, and infection. Let's start with allergic reactions. This is the most common, but it's usually the least serious because everyone is different, and most people don't have major allergies to inks. The most common symptoms are redness, itchiness, tingling, and skin lesions, and those decrease in commonness as you go down. Now, everyone has different reactions to allergies because we're not all the same. So if anything feels off, you may have an allergic reaction, and you should probably take precautions anyway. So if you feel you may be having an allergic reaction, you should simply use ice on the tattoo site and take Benadryl. However, if you develop skin lesions or you believe you're entering anaphylactic shock, you need to see a doctor immediately. The Regensburg University in Germany found that skin lesions, which they call pseudolymphoma cutis, can lead to true lymphoma and cancer. This means that if you develop many skin lesions quickly, then that you may need to have your tattoo removed immediately. However, that's not such a bad process as it used to be. Dr. Will King published in 2012 in the magazine The Dermatologist the invention of a new technology known as pico lasers. Pico means the laser has a pulse time of 1 trillionth of a second, which means that there's almost no scarring and no pain. However, this is very expensive and not covered by any health insurance so far. So just to summarize, if you have an allergic reaction, if anything feels off, you're probably fine. But you should do ice and Benadryl anyway. And if you experience skin lesions or serious symptoms, call 911 or see a doctor immediately. But now let's move on to poisoning. Poisoning is much more rare than allergic reaction. Barely ever happens, but it is extremely serious, so you should have it on your radar. Just to recap what Sam told you, black ink is based on amorphous carbon compounds known commonly as soot. And the Journal of Experimental Dermatology published in 2010 the presence of heavy metals like mercury and lead and carcinogens like PAHs in many types of soot-based ink. Ink is also unregulated, which means that you really don't know what you're getting unless you ask. According to the CDC Public Health blog, the most common symptoms of heavy metal poisoning are nausea, insomnia, hypertension, extreme weight loss, and if this goes untreated, it inevitably leads to kidney and liver failure and death. If you believe that you are experiencing these symptoms and you may have even had heavy metal poisoning, you need to call poison control or see your local toxicologist immediately. They'll probably prescribe you EDTA, which is a chelating agent that will sequester the heavy metals from your blood. However, this is a serious condition and it may take days or weeks for you to feel better. So, now that that's out of the way, let's move on to infection. Infection is the least common, and it is the least common, the most rare side effect. But the reason for that, as Christine explained, was the progression of aseptic technique throughout time. But to make sure that your risk is as low as it should be, you need to make sure you take all the proper precautions, because your tattoo artist may be unlicensed, and this is not FDA regulated. So ask, does your tattoo artist use sterile needles? Are they individually packaged? You should ask to see the needle being taken out of the package. Ask your tattoo artist if they've received bloodborne pathogen training from a certified government institution like OSHA, NIH, or the CDC. You should ask about the ink. Is it soot-based? Does it contain heavy metals? How is it sterilized? And what is your risk? If they can't tell you, you should probably not get a tattoo from that person. Also, and finally, this may be unpopular, but you should bandage your tattoo with antibiotic cream after getting it. You may not be able to show it off for the rest of the day until it heals, but if it gets infected, nobody wants to see it anyway. Now, according to the CDC report on hepatitis surveillance in 2005, hepatitis C is actually the most commonly transmitted disease for tattoos that have been in non-hygienic conditions. Hepatitis C causes chronic conditions and pain in 85% of cases, and there's currently no cure. So please, be informed and tell your friends to follow this if they're going to get a tattoo. However, if you believe you may have an infection, look for the symptoms: redness, itchiness, white pus, and in rare cases, bubbles that will form on the skin. Redness and itchiness may mean you have an allergic reaction, so don't respond quickly to those. But if you see white pus coming out of your tattoo, that is most likely your body's response to an infection, and you need to see a doctor. However, it's not a serious condition, because tattoo infections are rare and mostly minor. Your doctor will probably prescribe you antibiotics like cyclomycin, and you'll be better in a couple of days, as long as you take all the proper precautions. In conclusion, tattoos can cause allergic reactions, poisoning, and infection, but all of these complications are very recognizable and treatable. If you only remember one thing that I've said today, remember that if you or someone you care about gets a tattoo, make sure you are diligent and on the lookout for signs of complications for at least the first few days, and seek medical attention if there may be any serious symptoms, because tattoos only remain meaningful if you remain healthy. And now I'll turn it over to Andrea to wrap it up.
In conclusion, tattoos go further beyond than just the ink on the skin. My group and I have informed you today about the cultural and representative history of the tattoos, from the ink lady and to the technology, from the bronze points to the ink, the actual technology they use today. Christine informed us on the health implications, what you should look for. Like, there has been reports of AIDS from tattooing, and then Mark told us how to treat our tattoos. So let's all go back to spring break, and we're on the beach, and we see the bodies tattooed. Just have in the back of your head where you know where the tattoo might have came from, where it originated from. Look for if there's redness or anything, any problems problems associated with them, so you can go to the left. And also, according to a study by Mark Gwynn, tattoos are correlated with sexual health. So I'm going to leave that to your imagination when you're on your spring break. That's it.